the gridlock and the divisions here, rather than help us try to find ways to build consensus and work together in the best interest of the American people. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Kansas.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for being able to maintain order in this very crowded chamber. It should be a crowded chamber. It is not. I say it should be because this should be a required debate. Matter of fact, we should have had the debate. I am the ranking member of the Senate Rules Committee. The distinguished senator from Texas just pointed out if we went to regular order, we would be having a meeting in the Rules Committee. We would be having a very interesting debate, very educational debate. And I think that especially for the class of 10 and the class of 12, on the majority side, who did not have the advantage of listening to Bob Byrd's lecture to every class that came in, sermon to every class that came in, we all became born again to our responsibilities as senators and seeing the light with only his advantage of being both in the majority and the minority. I regret that that's not the case. I regret we're not in the Rules Committee. And I rise, like the distinguished senator from Texas and others that have spoken about this, our leader, Senator Alexander in particular, giving us a real history on what is going on here or what is not going on. And we're trying to discuss the so-called nuclear option that the majority leader reportedly wishes to deploy. And we are apparently brought to this point as a result of the leader's frustration. I was here when obviously he was simply frustrated with the pace of the Senate and how the Senate operates. This really comes down to the NLRB and the appointments to the NLRB and the fact that two courts found that these appointments were illegal. That is what our side objects to. It's not especially to the appointments. And apparently we're going to have a cloture vote on it, and apparently the nuclear gun is cocked and ready to be pulled. There's a country western song, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home." Well, Harry, don't take that nuclear gun to this body. Take it back to Searchlight, Nevada, put it back in its holster if in fact a nuclear gun has a holster. That would be my advice. And I would say this about the majority leader. I've known him for a long time. We worked together on the Ethics Committee. And I mean we work together. And as majority leader, I've had a good relationship. He has a good sense of humor. Sometimes that doesn't show, but he actually does. I remember one time he was conducting a filibuster, a mini filibuster. I don't remember the issue. I was the acting presiding officer. I was listening, talking about how rabbits were eating the cactus in front of his home in Searchlight, Nevada. Whereupon I took the floor and we engaged in quite a colloquy about rabbits and cactus and not to sit on cactus. There are a lot of cactus in the world. This is probably the biggest one that we are attempting to sit on, and I just don't think it's a very good idea. The majority leader was a boxer. He was a good one. And his hero is Smokin' Joe Frazier. So when I talk to him, I call him Smokin' Joe. And so my appeal to him, if he's listening, and he probably isn't, but if he reads about this or if his staff tells him, tell him that your old friend from the Ethics Committee had some advice. Smokin' Joe used to wait until the light rounds or the late rounds. He was in better shape. But he knew when to hold them and when to fold them. And he was a great champion. We don't need to go down this road. We really don't need to go down this road. But apparently the majority leader has determined that, and this is my view, he will have to destroy the United States Senate in order to save it. Those are pretty strong words. They're harsh words, but I intend them to be. We shouldn't be confused about this. In breaking the rules to change the rules, the majority seeks to destroy what has made the Senate great and very, very unique in the history of the world. I'm repeating the advice that we all got from Senator Byrd, the institutional flame of the Senate. Again, every time a new class came in, he would give his sermon or his lecture or his advice or his counsel, and we all took it, regardless of whether we were Democrats or Republicans. The Senate has always been the one place where all Americans could be assured that they would have a voice. Every American, no matter what state they happen to live in or what political party they belong to, knew they would be represented here, Kansas, Massachusetts, wherever. They would be represented. Minority views were respected. Even if your party was not in power, you still had a voice. Unfortunately, if you pull that trigger on that nuclear gun, the majority majority will abolish that. If you take that step, that's surely going to lead to complete control of this institution by the majority. That's been predicted by virtually everybody who has spoken, and I intend to quote a lot of majority leaders and a lot of people in the Senate on the Democrat side that have pointed this out. I know that some, more especially those who have never been in the minority on the other side, will seek to minimize the import of what they are doing. Oh, it's just a small change. They will claim that what they are trying to do is very limited, applying only to executive nominations. I wish I had a chart here. All I have is this small, and you can't focus on that. I don't expect you to do it. But if you look at the difference of 68% on civilian nominations that are confirmed in past administrations in the 106th Congress, and you're talking 68, 72 in that neighborhood, then you move clear up here to the 112th, where we are now under President Obama, 82, 86%. What's the deal? I mean, other than being upset about the NLRB. Make no mistake, the change itself will be less important than the manner in which it is imposed. Let me repeat that. The change itself will be less important than the manner in which it is imposed. If the majority decides to write new rules with a simple majority vote, regardless of the issue, to ignore the existing rules that require a supermajority to achieve such a change, it will have put us on a path that will surely lead to total control of this body by the majority. As of today, there is only one House of Congress where the majority has total control. The majority wishes, apparently now, there were two, or there will be two. We do not have to wonder what the Senate will become if they get their wish. We only need to look to the House of Representatives. We will become the senior House. I don't know about the upper house or the lower house. Perhaps we'll be the upper house. But we will become the House. And I know that doesn't mean much to many of my colleagues who have never been in the minority or served in the House. I served as an administrative assistant to a wonderful House member for 12 years and was in the House for 16 years, and now I've had the privilege of now serving my third term in the Senate. I've been in the majority, and I've been in the minority. The senator from Texas is surely right. You know, majority is better. Many of you folks who should be here have never served in the House. Many of you have never served in the minority. I've done both, as I have indicated. Let me explain what it means to serve in the minority in the House to those who have never had this wonderful privilege. In the House, no bill comes to the floor without a rule. The rule governs the length of debate and the amendments that will be considered. If you want to even speak on the bill, you have to get the bill manager to give you some of the very limited time available under the rule. If there is not enough time, you won't be able to even speak on it. The majority in the House writes the rule, and they decide how much time they will allow. The rule also determines what amendments will be considered. If the rule does not allow for consideration of your amendment, it won't be considered. It won't be debated. It won't be voted on. The majority in the House decides what amendments will be considered. If you are a member of the majority, they might allow consideration of your amendment if you're in good standing with the Rules Committee. If you are a member of the minority, you can forget about getting a vote on your amendment. If the majority doesn't want to allow it, it will not happen. And as a member of the minority, there's nothing that you can do about it. I know about this. I remember when I first went to the House Rules Committee under a very determined, aggressive chairman of the Rules Committee, and I had an amendment that I thought was well placed, well taken, pertinent. It was on agriculture. It was on something that dealt with the Farm Bill or agriculture program policy. But I was a Republican, and I went in and I thought that this amendment would be considered under parliamentary procedure, whether it would be germane or not. Guess what? It was just a rehash of a partisan debate, which really wasn't partisan because we had a lot of bipartisan support for it. So my amendment was not allowed. And then I figured it out. Charlie Stenholm was from Texas. Well, he is from Texas. And he is still active in the agriculture community, very active, very respected. Charlie wanted the same amendment. So I finally figured out, well, let Stenholm introduce my amendment, but don't tell him it's my amendment. So Stenholm introduced my amendment, and then as soon as it was approved by the House Rules Committee, then it became the Stenholm-Roberts Amendment. If it passed, obviously it became the Robert Stenholm Amendment in Kansas and the Stenholm-Roberts Amendment in Texas. And that's how we got things done. And so we had the Stenholm-Roberts amendments for quite a few years. I never went into the Rules Committee, because if I did, I knew I would lose. Boy, talk about one-party rule. That's just, we don't want to do that. Now, guess what? We had a revolution back in 1994. I became chairman of the Ag Committee. All of a sudden, the Stenholm-Roberts amendments became the Robert-Stenholm amendments. And that's how it worked in the House of Representatives. So I don't think we want to do that. It is precisely for this reason that many members of the House choose to run for the Senate. That's why I did. The Senate is supposed to be different. Here, if you want to be heard on a bill, it will happen. Here, if you want to offer an amendment, you can. Now, we haven't really been living up to that recently, but that is how the place is supposed to work. And the Senate and members' right to speak and amend are not supposed to depend on the whim of the majority. Or now it's on a whim and a prayer. That is why people run for the Senate. That is what has distinguished this body from the House since we first convened in 1789. The majority, unfortunately, wants to erase that distinction. It wants to ensure that members do not have any rights beyond those which the majority is willing to grant. And you don't have to take my word for it. The distinguished majority leader, who I affectionately call Smoking Joe, himself has recognized this. As my colleague, Senator Alexander, from that desk right over there, has previously noted, Senator Reid addressed this topic in his book, In the Good Fight. How appropriate, In the Good Fight, from a boxer, and now our majority leader. Senator Reid wrote about the battle over the nuclear option in 2005. Things were a little different. This is what he wrote. Once you open that Pandora's box, it was just a matter of time before a Senate leader who couldn't get his way on something moved to eliminate the filibuster for regular business as well, and that simply put would be the end of the United States Senate. The end of the United States Senate. He repeated that. The distinguished majority leader said at that time, it is the genius of the founders that they conceived the Senate as a solution to the big state, small state problem. And central to that solution was the protection of the rights of the minority. A filibuster is the minority's way of not allowing the majority to shut off debate, and without robust debate, the Senate is crippled. Senator Reid went on to say such a move would transform the body into an institution that looked just like the House of Representatives, where everything passes with a simple majority. And he also wrote this, there will come a time when we will all be gone and the institutions that we now serve will be run by men and women not yet living, and those institutions will either function well because we've taken care of them, or they will be in disarray and someone else's problem to solve. Boy, that's pretty heavy stuff. That's meaningful. That's something everybody here should consider. He described the nuclear option this way at that time. In a fit of partisan fury, not quite sure we're there yet, maybe partisan frustration, they were trying to blow up the Senate. Senate rules can only be changed by 2/3 of the vote of the Senate, or 67 senators. The Republicans at that time were going to do it illegally with a simple majority, or 51. Vice President Cheney was prepared to overrule the Senate parliamentarian. Future generations be damned. You think the senator was upset then? He was upset then a heck of a lot more than he was as of this morning. if only the majority leader would recall his own words. The Vice President also recognized the damage that we've done by this. This is what Vice President Biden said on the floor when he was still a member of this body. Now, this is important stuff. We all know Joe Biden. We're all a friend of Joe Biden. He's the Vice President of the United States. And when he was a senator, he said something very important. He said this, put simply, the nuclear option would transform the Senate from the so-called cooling saucer our founding fathers talked about to cool the passions of the day, to a pure majoritarian body like a parliament. Republicans control the Senate, and they have decided they're going to change that rule. At its core, the filibuster is not about stopping a nominee or a bill. It is about compromise and moderation. Joe Biden said that is why the founders put unlimited debate in. When you have to, he said, and I never conducted a filibuster, but if I did, the purpose would be that you have to deal with me as one senator. It does not mean I get my way. It means you have to compromise. You may have to see my side of the argument. That is what it is about, engendering compromise and moderation. Joe Biden went on to say this, if there is one thing I have learned in my years here, once you change the rules, no matter the rule, and surrender the Senate's institutional power, you never get it back. And folks, we're about to break the rules to change the rules. The nuclear option abandons America's sense of fair play. I am continuing to quote Senator Biden. It is the one thing this country stands for, not tilting the playing field on the side of those who control and own the field. And then he said this to the Republican side of the aisle, which then was in the majority. I say to my friends on the Republican side, you may own the field right now, but you won't own it forever. I pray God when the Democrats take back control, we don't make the kind of naked power grab you are doing, but I am afraid you will teach my new colleagues the wrong lessons. We are only in the Senate as temporary custodians of the Senate. Senator Biden said the Senate will go on. And he said, mark my words, history will judge this Republican majority harshly if it makes this catastrophic move. I hope the Vice President will listen to his own prayers. We don't need any divine intervention here, but maybe he could share his concerns with the majority leader. It could help us avert a real catastrophe. The majority leader and the Vice President are not the only people who recognize the damage that would be done by triggering the so-called nuclear option. Our former parliamentarian, the man whose advice I sought when I had the privilege of being the acting presiding officer, and Richard Ehrenberg, a professor and one-time aide to former Majority Leader George Mitchell, wrote a book on the subject, Defending the Filibuster. Another quote, I know I'm quoting a lot, but these are important things. I hope they stick like a burr under your saddle so that they make you stop and think about this. If a 51-vote majority is empowered to rewrite the Senate rules, the day will come, as it did in the House of Representatives, when a majority will construct rules that give it near absolute control over amendments and debate. And there is no going back from that. No majority in the House of Representatives has or ever will voluntarily relinquish that power in order to give the minority a greater voice in crafting legislation. None. So do not be fooled by those who would try to minimize the impact of what the majority is actually contemplating. The rule changes themselves are less important than the manner in which they will be imposed. Once the majority has decided it can set the rules, there is no limit to what the majority might do in the future. I hope you understand that. There are no constraints. The majority claims these changes are necessary to make the Senate function. If it decides further changes are needed, it will make them. The minority will have no voice, no say, no power. That's never been the case in the Senate, Madam President. Never. Tragically, what the majority contemplates is at once most calamitous and totally unnecessary. The filibuster is a product of our dysfunction, not the source. Now, I know that many members, and I have harped on this, do not even know what it's like to serve in a functioning Senate. They hardly know what it's like to operate under regular order, where bills are referred to committee, amended, brought to the floor, debated, amended, and passed. This matter should be before the Rules Committee. We should have a complete hearing, then bring it to the floor. We averted this at the first of this year. I know people think the filibuster is to blame for this breakdown. They're wrong. We don't operate under regular order here because the majority leadership doesn't want to. They have an agenda. I understand that. They have been trying to operate this place like the House of Representatives for years. They want to control debate and to control the amendments. That is true. That's probably Joe Biden calling me right now saying he agrees with us. Can you turn that damn thing off? Just do that and hold it down. Yeah, Joe. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry. I apologize, Madam Chairman. I know a little bit about this. Senator Reid, when we were talking about the Farm Bill last year, and he said, we can't do a Farm Bill in less than 3 weeks. I said, we'll do it in 3 days. Senator Stabenow and I had worked very hard to get common agreement on Farm Bill. We did it. But we needed regular order. We needed to open it up. We needed to give senators here on our side the first time chance that they would at least offer an amendment. And we did it. We had 73 amendments. We did it in 2.5 days. We had regular order. And people around here said, gee, is this what the Senate used to be all about? And that was the case. So it can work. I know there are folks over there that think the filibuster is to blame for this breakdown. They're wrong. Rather than give up that control that they have just decided during the past 4 years, with the exception of a few bills like I just mentioned, I think they want to make it official. I think they'd rather blow up the Senate than let it work its will. It would be a tragedy. They think it will save the Senate, but it will destroy it. That threat of destruction may not be obvious to some today, but it is real. If the nuclear option is deployed one day, it will become clear to all. And when that day comes, and people wonder, what happened to the Senate? When did it die? We will know the answer. It died the day the nuclear option was triggered. That's what nuclear devices do. They destroy. This is not just a minor shot across the bow, folks, to be used only once. This is a mushroom cloud over the Capitol. Again, I would urge the distinguished majority leader, don't take your nuclear gun to town. I yield back the balance of my time. Oh, I beg your pardon. I would like to ask unanimous consent to put the remarks by U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd, the institutional flame of the Senate, at the orientation of new senators, December 3, 1996, at this point in the record. And I ask unanimous consent that Senator Byrd's final speech before the Rules Committee, called the filibuster and its consequences, follow that. And I urge all members of this wonderful body to read what Senator Byrd said and urged and counseled and advised. I know the new members have not had this experience. When you first went in, you thought, my gosh, how long is this going to last? I mean, the man wrote a book about the U.S. Senate, and as it turned out, we hung on every word, and we took his advice, and it's good advice. It's printed in the record. Read it.
Without objection. The material will be placed in the record.
We might have a heck of a test on it next week. I yield back.
Madam President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Madam President, I appreciate the Senator from Kansas' comments, and I'm sure he'll have to go take a call from the Vice President to discuss his remarks here on the floor. But I appreciate the way in which he talked about all that's been said here on the floor in the past between the Vice President, now President Obama, who was then a United States Senator, the leaders here in the United States Senate. We've had lots of statements here on the floor and commitments made in the past. In fact, the majority leader has twice committed on the Senate floor not to use the nuclear option, the last time being just a few months ago. And these were not conditional commitments. They were commitments. They weren't commitments with caveats. They were not commitments not to violate the rules of the Senate unless it became convenient for political purposes to violate the rules of the Senate. Just as recently as January 27th in 2011, the majority leader said, and I quote, "I agree that the proper way to change Senate rules is through the procedures established in those rules and I will oppose any effort in this Congress or the next to change the Senate's rules other than through the regular order. Earlier this year, January 24th, 2013, a discussion between the Minority Leader, Senator McConnell, and Majority Leader, Senator Reid. Senator McConnell said I would confirm with the Majority Leader that the Senate would not consider other resolutions relating to any standing order or rules this Congress unless they went through the regular order process, posing a question of the Majority Leader. Majority Leader Reid, that is correct. Any other resolutions related to Senate procedure would be subject to a regular order process, including consideration by the Rules Committee. That was January 24th, this year, 2013. Well, what's happened since that point, Madam President, that would change the way that the Majority Leader views this issue? Well, let's see. We confirmed the Secretary of Energy by a vote of 97-0. Confirmed the Secretary of Interior, vote of 87-11. Confirmed the Secretary of the Treasury, vote of 71-26. Confirmed the Secretary of State, 94-3. And I might add, in that case, just 7 days after the Senate got his nomination. Confirmed the Secretary of Commerce, 97-1. Confirmed the Secretary of Transportation, 100-0. Confirmed the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, 96-0. Confirmed the Administrator of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, 91-7. The Chair of the Securities and Exchange Commission was confirmed by voice vote. In other words, unanimously. Not to mention the fact, Madam President, that we've passed major legislation out of the Senate. We just completed a 3-week debate on a major immigration overhaul, and it passed with a bipartisan vote. We had a major debate on a farm bill, which passed with a bipartisan vote. Other legislation has moved through the United States Senate in the last few months. So it begs the question, why are we now having this discussion? The Majority Leader said back in January that he wasn't going to change the rules. And to change the rules, you have to break the rules. Let's make that very clear. It takes 67 votes to change the rules of the United States Senate. What's being talked about here is basically using a procedural device, a gimmick if you will, to be able to change the rules with 51 votes. In other words, breaking the rules to change the rules. Madam President, there is absolutely no basis, no foundation, based on the numbers and the facts I just quoted, for the majority to be making the argument that they are here today. And if you go back and look at the statements that have been made by others in the past, and I remember coming here in 2005 as a new member of the Senate from the House of Representatives, and we were at that point debating judicial nominations. The Democrats were holding up several of President Bush's judicial nominations, and there was a big debate about whether to exercise a nuclear option, in other words, to confirm some of those with 51 votes. Representatives, we moved things in an orderly way. There was a Rules Committee. The Rules Committee decided what legislation came to the floor, what amendments were made in order, how much time was allowed for debate on each amendment. It was a very structured and orderly process, and those of us who got here to the Senate were frustrated at times with the slow pace in the Senate. And it made sense on some levels to think, gee, wouldn't it be great if we could make the Senate function more like the House? But, Madam President, fortunately, cooler heads prevailed because the Senate is not designed to function like the House. It was created for very different purpose and very different design. And what we're talking about here would completely undermine that purpose and that design for this institution. And we have observed here traditions, rules in the United States Senate for decades. And what we're talking about here, if the majority has its way, is doing something that would break the rules to change the rules and forever change the United States Senate in a way that Majority Leader Senator Reid mentioned back in 2009 that doing that would ruin the country and that the Senate would be destroyed if we went about a rules change along the lines of what's being talked about here today. And so I hope that cooler heads will prevail again. I certainly understand now, as I look back on what happened in 2005, the wisdom of those who had been here a little bit longer and understood a little bit more about the way this institution operates, the importance of having a United States Senate where you have open debate, where you have the opportunity for amendments, something that in the House oftentimes you didn't have the opportunity to do. And it's important, in my view, Madam President, that Republicans and Democrats come together here and recognize that if we go back on the traditions, the rules, the precedents here in the United States Senate, we will be forever changing not just the rules, but we will be changing the Senate. And that is certainly not what our founders had in mind, nor do I think, Madam President, that's what our colleagues on the other side have in mind. They may be well-intentioned, but what they're talking about doing is going to change forever the Senate in a way that would be very perilous to this institution, and more importantly, jeopardize the rights of the American people to have their voices heard in the United States Senate. Madam President, I yield the floor.
I have the greatest respect for my friend from South Dakota, but obviously missed the speeches this morning. So we went through all this. I'm not going to repeat what's gone on since the broken promise earlier this year. Madam President, I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 51.
Is there objection? No. I'm sorry. The question is on the motion to proceed. The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes have it.
I send a cloture motion.
The motion is agreed to.
Thank you, Madam President. I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination. Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, Richard Cordray of Ohio to be director.
The clerk will report the closure motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Richard Cordray of Ohio to be director, Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection, signed by 18 senators as follows. Read.
I ask unanimous consent, Madam President, we not read the names.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
I now move.
The motion is agreed to.
I'm so sorry again to interrupt you. I move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 100.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination. National Labor Relations Board, Richard F. Griffin, Jr. of the District of Columbia to be a member.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Richard F. Griffin, Jr. of the District of Columbia to be a member of the National Labor Relations Board, signed by 17 senators as follows. Read.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that reading the names be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
Question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to calendar number 101.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination. National Labor Relations Board, Sharon Block of the District of Columbia to be a member.
I have a cloture motion, Madam President, at the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Sharon Block of the District of Columbia to be a member of the National Labor Relations Board, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask unanimous consent that reading the names be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
Question is on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it.
I now
The
move.
motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session to consider calendar number 104.
Question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
There's a
The
cloture
clerk
motion.
will report the nomination.
Nomination. National Labor Relations Board, Mark Gaston Pierce of New York to be a member.
I have a cloture motion. I would ask the clerk to report if the chair agrees.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Mark Gaston Pierce of New York to be a member of the National Labor Relations Board, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask unanimous consent that reading the names be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask consent that mandatory quorum under Rule 22 of the Senate be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I now move to proceed to the legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 178.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Export-Import Bank of the United States, Fred P. Hochberg of New York, to be president.
There's a cloture motion at the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Fred P. Hochberg of New York to be president of the Export-Import Bank of the United States, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask unanimous consent that reading the names not be necessary.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask consent that mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I now move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 99.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Labor, Thomas Edward Perez of Maryland, to be secretary.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Thomas Edward Perez of Maryland to be Secretary of Labor, signed by 17 senators as follows.
I ask consent that reading the names be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to.
I now move to proceed to executive session to consider count number 98.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed to. The clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Environmental Protection Agency, Regina McCarthy of Massachusetts, to be administrator.
I send a cloture motion to the desk.
The clerk will report the cloture motion.
Cloture motion, we, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Regina McCarthy of Massachusetts to be administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency, signed by 17 senators as follows. Reed, Boxer, Cardin, Coons, Leahy, Carper, Wyden, Murray, Udall of New Mexico, Heinrich, Sanders, Whitehouse, Baucus, Durbin, Gillibrand, Merkley, and Schatz.
Ask consent the mandatory quorum on Rule 22 be waived.
Is there objection? Without objection.
I move to proceed to legislative session.
The question is on the motion to proceed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion is agreed.
Madam President.
Republican leader.
Madam President, I have a consent that I think would set up these votes in a much more expeditious way than the way the Majority Leader is proceeding. But first, let me just say, these are dark days in the history of the Senate. I hate that we have come to this point. We've witnessed the Majority Leader break his word to the United States Senate, and now our request for a joint meeting of all the senators has been set for Monday night, a time when attendance around here is frequently quite spotty, in an obvious effort to keep as many of his members from hearing the concerns and arguments of the other side as possible. It remains our view that for this to be the kind of joint session of the Senate that it ought to be, given the tendency of the Senate to have sparse attendance on Monday night, to have this meeting on Tuesday before it's too late. Having said that, a more expeditious way to accomplish most of what the Majority Leader is trying to accomplish would be achieved by the following consent. I ask unanimous consent that on Tuesday at 2:15, the Senate proceed to consecutive votes on the confirmation of the following nominations. Number 104, that's Pierce to be a member of the NLRB. Number 102, Johnson to be a member of the NLRB. And number 103, Ms. Amara to be a member of the NLRB. Now, I might just say parenthetically, if those nominees were confirmed, coupled with the two nominees illegally appointed, whose illegal appointments continue to the end of the year, the NLRB would have a full complement of 5 members and able to conduct its business. I further ask consent that following those votes, the Senate proceed to the cloture motion filed on calendar number 99, that is Perez, to be Secretary of Labor. And further, if cloture is invoked, the Senate immediately proceed to a vote on the confirmation of the nomination. I would add parenthetically, that would eliminate the post 30 hours, assuming cloture were invoked, on the very controversial nominee, Perez, to be Secretary of Labor. Further, the Senate vote on the cloture motion filed on calendar number 98, McCarthy, to be EPA Director. And if cloture is invoked, the Senate proceed to vote on the confirmation of the nomination. Also, eliminating the 30 hours post-cloture, if cloture is invoked, on McCarthy. And I might add that the ranking member of the Environment Committee supports cloture on the McCarthy nomination. Thereby, it's reasonable to assume that cloture would be invoked on what is, for a lot of our members, including myself, a very controversial nomination. I further ask that the Senate then vote on the cloture motion that was filed on number 178. This is someone named Hochberg, to be president of the Export-Import Bank. And again, if cloture is invoked, the Senate proceed to an immediate vote on the confirmation of that nomination, again, eliminating the 30 hours post-cloture, assuming cloture is invoked, and I assume that it will be. Finally, I ask consent that the following votes listed above, the Senate proceed to cloture votes on the remaining 3 filed cloture motions. Now, before the Chair rules, what this allows, as I indicated, is for the Senate to work efficiently through a series of nominations in a quicker fashion than the Majority Leader has proposed. They would get their votes, and there would not be a delay. This would only leave discussion and votes on the 3 remaining illegally, according to the federal courts, the 3 remaining illegally appointed nominations. Mr. President, that's my consent.
Mr. President, reserving the right to object.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, no matter how often my friend rudely talks about me not breaking my word, I'm not going to respond talking about how many times he's broken his word. That doesn't add anything to this little debate we're having here, so he can keep saying that as much as he wants. All we have to do is look back at the record today. And as to the caucus Monday night, my members will be here. I don't understand, unless this is part of the overall pattern that we've come to expect around here, to not do anything today you can do tomorrow. Mr. President, We're going to have a vote at 5:30. Members are usually pretty good at getting here for votes at 5:30. And I also, Mr. President, am stunned by boasting about the ranking member on the EPW committee suddenly seeing the light. And he's going to allow Gina McCarthy to get a vote. Now, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that something to cheer about? He's held this woman up. He's the one that's responsible for 1,100 questions to her. That's what's wrong here, Mr. President. Now, this is so transparent, what my friend has asked. He has said he wants to approve 2 Republican members in NLRB. Let's have those votes first, and only 1 Democratic nominee. What does this mean? It means within a couple months, the Republicans have a majority of the NLRB. I don't blame them for wanting that. They don't like the organization anyway, just like they don't like Cordry's organization. So I can understand that the Republican leader would like to get consent to create a Republican majority in the NLRB. But it's so obvious, I object.
Objection is heard.
So, Mr. President, we are going to have a caucus Monday at 6 o'clock, the old Senate chamber. We're going to vote at 5:30. And I would hope with something this important, we'll have attendance. I know my caucus will be there. And if nothing is resolved there, which the way things have been going today, likely it won't be, so we'll have a vote sometime early Tuesday morning on these nominees.
Mr. President, the majority leader always reminds me he can have the last word, and I'm sure he can have the last word again. Speaking for Senator Vitter, he did ask for a lot of information from the new prospective director of the EPA. So did Senator Boxer. She asked for 70,000 pages herself, but he was satisfied with the responses that he got. This is how the process ought to work. This is how it's worked for decades. You're trying to get answers to questions. You're trying to engage in some kind of prediction as to how somebody might operate in the future. What the majority leader has really been saying here all along is he wants the confirmation process to be speedy and for the minority to sit down and shut up. He believes that advise and consent means sit down and shut up. Confirm these nominees when I tell you to. Now, the reason he's taken a lot of heat over this is because he's broken his word to the United States Senate, given back last January that we had resolved the rules issue for this Congress. And I know for a fact, even though he may get his 51 votes, there are a lot of Democrats who are not happy with where you are. When they tell me that, the Republican I expect they'd be least likely to want to tell that to. I know what's going on here. They've been hammered into line. This has been personalized by the majority leader. You got to do this for me. And what's astonishing here is he's saying you got to do this for me because you got to help me break my word, go back on everything I said in my own biography just a few years ago. You got to help me look bad. You got to help me break my word, violate what I said in my own biography, create unnecessary controversy in the United States Senate, which has done major bills on a bipartisan basis all year long and had begun to get back to normal. This is really hard to understand. And this is why my members are astonished at where we are. They're scratching their heads, saying, who manufactured this crisis? We know who manufactured it. The guy right over here to my left. So this is really a sad, sad day for the United States Senate. And if we don't pull back from the brink here, my friend, the majority leader, is going to be remembered as the worst leader of the Senate ever. The leader of the Senate who fundamentally changed the body. It makes me sad. Some of my members are angry. I'm more sad about it. But it's a shame that we've come to this. I sure hope all the Democratic senators are there Monday night. I'm certainly going to encourage my members to be there. It's high time we sat down and tried to understand each other, because many members on the other side are hearing a different version from the facts that are largely unrelated to reality. So, Mr. President, I know my friend, the Majority Leader, will have the last word. He reminds me that frequently on a daily basis, that the difference between being the Majority Leader and the Minority Leader is he gets the last word. So I'll yield the floor and listen to the last word.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
No matter how many times he says it, he tends to not focus on what he has done to the Senate. As I indicated earlier, there's lots of time for name-calling. But we know it's replete in the record as delivered this morning, how he said there would be no filibusters. We would follow the norms of the Senate, only extraordinary circumstances. Extraordinary circumstances have come because we're in session, I guess. The only person that I know that thinks things are going just fine here is my friend. The American people knows this institution is being hammered hard, and he doesn't have to worry about me. Heat I've taken. I haven't taken any heat. I had a very nice caucus today. My caucus was very thoughtful. We heard from out of my 54 senators, we probably heard from 25 or 26 of them. The attendance was nearly perfect. So, Mr. President, I don't want him to feel sorry for the Senate, certainly not for me. And I'm going to continue to try to speak in a tone that is appropriate. His name-calling, I guess he follows, I hope not, the demagogic theory that the more you say something, if it's false, people start believing it. But, Mr. President, it's quite interesting that he thinks that the Richard Cordray, who no one says there's a thing wrong with this man, former Attorney General of the state, heavily populated state of Ohio. Democrats and Republicans have said he's a good guy. This man's been waiting for 724 days. Assistant Secretary in Defense, 292 days. Monetary Fund Governor, 169 days. EPA, 128 days. NLRB, 2 of them, 573 days. You have 15 of them. The average time waiting is 9 months. So, Mr. President, and of course reshuffling the votes as he wants them, I mean, that's a laugher. He wants to have a majority of this NLRB to be Republicans. I don't think that's really a good idea. So, Mr. President, we're going to have our caucus Monday. I think it was a good idea. You know, I've tried to have them before. My friend has objected to them. That's replete in the press. But we're going to have this one. I'm happy to do that. My friend said the process works. The process works. The status quo is good. I don't think so.
Mr. President,
Republican leader.
Of course, the majority of the NLRB would not be Republicans, and I've mentioned to the administration on several occasions, send us up 2 nominees who are not illegally appointed, but we can't seem to get that done. I mean, the taint attached to the 2 NLRB nominees and to Mr. Cordray, who I agree is a good man and many of our members support, is that they were illegally appointed. But, of course, the agencies have not been at a disadvantage. They're there, waiting. He may have been waiting to be confirmed, but he's not waiting to do the job. He's in office. The 2 NLRB members in office. The question is, do we respect the law? A federal court has said the 2 NLRB members were illegally appointed. Mr. Cordray, unfortunately, was appointed on exactly the same day in exactly the same way. Is the Senate just completely lawless? Do we not care what the federal courts say? I'm just stunned at where we are. It's pretty clear to me that all the other nominees are highly likely to be confirmed. So what it really comes down to is that the majority leader is going to break the rules of the Senate, to change the rules of the Senate in order to confirm with 51 votes 3 illegally appointed positions that the federal courts have told us are unconstitutionally appointed. That is the rationale for the nuclear option. That's why I say it's a sad day for the Senate, a sad day for America.
Mr. President.
The majority leader.
Illegally appointed. Why did President Obama recess appoint Cordray and the 2 NLRB members? Because Republicans had blocked them. Blocked them, blocked them, blocked them. Now, we count Cordray as only 571 days. That went on long before he got there. Elizabeth Warren is the one that set up this program. They said, no chance, don't even think of bringing her here. And that's where he came with Cordray. Elizabeth Warren found him as Attorney General of Ohio. So these big crocodile tears, you know, you have recess appointments because the president had no choice if he wanted his team to work. And he said, we would be happy to process them quickly. Just like Richard Perez has been processed quickly, just like all these people have been processed quickly. Sorry, Mr. President, sorry. So there's not a chance that we're going to let the NLRB be dominated by Republicans. That one organization above all looks out for working men and women in this country should not be dominated by Republicans, and it's not going to be. So I repeat, this issue could be resolved very quickly. I had somebody out here at my stakeout say, what happens if you get cloture on everybody? So there's no problem. They can all vote against these people. They can vote against them, every one of them. But they, on procedural basis, they're holding up votes on people who are well qualified and would be approved by the Senate if they got a vote. So this is a little strange deal. Talk about marshaling your troops to do something that's absolutely wrong. It's that. If they're so worried about the rules changes around here, it would seem to me they should approve 3 qualified people that no one suggests there's anything wrong with any of them. And why were they recess appointed? Because the Republicans forced President Obama to do that. So, Mr. President, there'll be no further votes. Next vote will be Monday at 5:30.
Mr. President.
The Republican leader.
On the issue of delay, I'm trying to avoid bursting out in laughter here. The 2 NLRB nominees were sent up to the Senate December the 15th, 2011. December the 15th, 2011. Before their paperwork got here, 2 weeks later, the president recess appointed them. Delay? Their paperwork hadn't even been arrived. Hadn't even arrived. The committee couldn't do anything with them, and a couple of weeks later, they were recess appointed. Now, that's not my definition of a delay by any objective standard. The core issue here, no matter how much the majority leader tries to obfuscate and discuss other matters, is he is prepared to break the rules of the Senate, to change the rules of the Senate for 3 nominees who were unconstitutionally appointed according to the federal circuit court in Washington, D.C. For that, the majority leader proposes to use the nuclear option. It's a sad commentary on today's Senate.
Sad
Majority leader.
day in the Senate created by the Republicans, Mr. President. This rule change, he keeps talking about the rule change. Mr. President, the presiding officer knows that the Constitution is pretty clear. It's clear there's one paragraph that says treaties take 2/3 vote. In that same paragraph, how many votes does it take to confirm a nomination? Simple majority. That's in our Constitution. Since 1977, rules have been changed in this body 17 times. not by fancy things done by the Rules Committee, but right here in the Senate. So we have 3 people who are qualified, and if the Republicans want to avoid a problem, obviously they don't. What they want to do is continue. Can you imagine, Mr. President, the American people are looking at this and saying, the Republican leader thinks the Senate's going just fine, the status quo is good. Look at any poll. Gallup poll did one. 86% of the American people. Why do they think things are bad? Because of gridlock, not doing important things. Sure, we were able to get a few things done, but I have been here a while, and we've done some good things this year, but we should be doing lots of good things, not focus on immigration and a farm bill that's passed twice, on a postal bill that we passed once, we haven't passed it again. We talk a lot about WRDA. I'm glad we got that done, okay, WRDA. And I'm not going to denigrate my friend, the chairman of that committee, but, Mr. President, that bill is a mere shadow of its former self because of what the Republicans have done to make a mockery of what goes on here. All we want is for the President of the United States, whoever that might be, Democrat or Republican, to be able to have the team he wanted as contemplated in that document called the Constitution of the United States. That's not asking too much. Abs of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.